Larry joined the Giants 23 years ago after he and Peter McGowan actually assembled a new ownership group that kept the Giants in San Francisco. I think many of us forget that that was at peril at one time. And in '96, he became the COO of the Giants, and then in 2008, the president, and then in 2012, the CEO and the control partner who represents the Giants in all matters with Major League Baseball. Some of the most significant accomplishments that Larry has led in his tenure, and really there's many, have been the development and construction of AT&T Park, right at the top of the list. 3 million plus attendance for 13 of the last 15 seasons. And of course, 3 world championships in the last 5 seasons. He's also the CEO of Giants Development Services and a board member of Comcast Sportsnet in the Bay Area, and a member of the new merged MLB Enterprises board with the MLB Advanced Media Board. And he also chairs the Strategic Planning Committee for all of Major League Baseball. He's a 4th generation San Franciscan, a graduate of Cal Berkeley and also the Harvard Business School, and he's involved in a lot of charitable endeavors in the Bay Area. Larry, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Vince, and it's great being here with all of you.
You know, I think what's as interesting as your accomplishments is the way you've gotten there and some of the principles that you've employed in your career over the way. And we'll get into that in a minute. But before we do, talk a little bit about your passion for baseball and how did that start?
Well, you know, Vince, I grew up in San Francisco, and in the '60s, essentially. And if you grew up in the '60s in San Francisco, just like if you grew up in the '50s in New York, there was a dominating figure, and that was Willie Mays. And there was also Willie McCovey, and there was also Juan Marichal, there was also Orlando Cepeda. So we had these Hall of Famers, future Hall of Famers playing for the Giants. So my passion for baseball was literally taking the bus pretty much every Saturday when I could drum up the money or the friends, and my dad would take me a lot. Most Saturdays, actually, my dad would take me out to Candlestick Park to watch those players play. And I wanted to be Willie Mays. I wanted to run out in Giants uniform to center field one day and be Willie Mays. And I soon had a rude awakening. I wasn't going to be Willie Mays as a player, but I did then get into some other aspects, just as all of us in this room really, some other aspects of the sport that had to do with broadcasting and other things that got me into baseball as a career.
You know, it's not too many of us that get to go from wanting to be Willie Mays to working with him every day as you do now. It's really a dream. You know, in your Cal Berkeley days, it's interesting that you had an encounter with Charles O. Finley, the infamous owner of the Oakland Athletics, and was a real innovator and revolutionary owner. Tell us a little bit about that encounter you had and where that led you.
Well, I don't know how many of you remember Charlie Finley, but he was it was really a maverick and really, in many ways, ahead of his time in terms of a baseball entrepreneur, a baseball showman. So he had some great years, obviously, won 3 consecutive World Series, 72, 73, 74 in Oakland. At this point, I was at Cal Berkeley, and it was about 5 years later, though, it was 78. And he was winding down some from his ownership of the A's. It was clear, and he had talked about selling the team, and the team had fallen off. So it was 1978, and I was feeding my passion for baseball by broadcasting games for the school radio station, which I'm sure many of you have done perhaps in your college days. And so I was at the station, and I noticed that it was just about 10 days before opening day, and the A's did not have a radio station to broadcast their games, no station. So I truly had nothing to lose, picked up the phone, knew he had a company outside of Chicago, found the number, called up and said, Mr. Finley, please. And the assistant, I mean, think about this happening in today's world, calling an owner this kind of a cold call. And the assistant who picked up the phone said, Charlie, telephone. So hello, my name is Larry Baer. I'm with a KALX radio station, and we'd like to broadcast your games. And his first response is, I said, Baer, bullshit walks and money talks. How much you going to pay me? I said, well, Mr. Finley, then I had to come clean that this is a college station. I said, our FCC license is actually held by the regents of the University of California. So we would do this as a community service because opening day is April 6th, and today is March 28th, and there's no station broadcasting your games. And he says, oh, well, how old are you? I said, well, I'm 20. Who'll be the broadcaster? Well, I'm a junior majoring in political science, and I'd be one, and the other would be my partner who's a sophomore majoring in English. And he said, oh, I kind of like this. This would be fun. So that it happened. So actually, we got a lot of media coverage around it, and one of the things the next day said this was might be the first and ever one-figure broadcast deal. We sent him $1 in the mail. He said, send me $1 and you have the first 23 games of the season, which we broadcast. And he had actually was thinking at that time of selling the team to Marvin Davis in Denver. This is before the Rockies. And they were a very successful minor league town, as you know, AAA town, Denver was. And he had actually picked a date when the A's were coming off a road trip to Minnesota, and they were actually going to return to Denver and become the Denver A's in the middle of the season. And so he said you could broadcast the games up until May 8th when we become the Denver A's. So that was, but my object lesson, because obviously a lot of people are always talking about getting jobs in sports. We all of us in the industry get that. And one of the object lessons, one of the things I really learned was, go for it. What's the downside of making that crazy call or that request? You don't want to be obnoxious or overly aggressive, but being assertive, I think for a lot of folks in the world of sports, it's an important thing to do, get people's attention. And so we were somehow, in a crazy way, able to get Charlie Finley's attention.
That's wild. It seemed like one of the more formative points in your career was when you got out of Harvard Business School and began to work for Westinghouse, I believe, and then ultimately working for CBS and directly for Lawrence Tisch, the chairman. And this sort of piled onto your broadcasting days with the A's, sort of launched you into a career in media. Talk a little bit about broadcasting and that business.
One of the things that I worked for CBS across all the parts of the company, so it wasn't just sports. But one of the things that I just kept seeing in my days in the television business after getting an MBA is that in the sports world, content, you're really in the content business. And it gets drummed home to us in many different ways. I mean, at the ballpark, we need 3 million fans, essentially. The Giants need 3 million fans to make it successful. And the way you get fans is by making it appealing to come to the ballpark. How do you make it appealing to come to the ballpark? One of the biggest ways is to deliver content to them that makes the ballpark seem like a warm, inviting place. But beyond that, and really I think what's critical in today's world is we're in the content business in the sports world. And I think that sports events now, all throughout all the leagues, have a unique place in American society that from an advertiser standpoint, it's a live experience, which is really important for advertisers who are advertising products that are here and now. It's also an experience that advertising can get, if it's tastefully done, weaved into the content of the shows, whether it's just the Budweiser player of the game or it's behind home plate advertising. So what I learned in my days in the television world is that sports has a unique place in that it delivers content with, and I think the most important part of it all is a predictable audience, predictable rating. When I was at CBS, we'd have all sorts of producers and what they call showrunners, people developing shows, and they'd come to CBS, and it's a hit-driven business, and you would have the hit rate would be 1 in 50, maybe 2%. Would actually be able to stick beyond its 13 weeks or initial 26 weeks in terms of primetime shows. But in sports, it's there's a following, and that's very powerful. So what I learned really that is the power of our content to grow and reach audiences that with distributors. And When I was at CBS, it was really the transition from a 3, 4, 5 network world, really, with ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox. Those networks, when I first got to CBS, they were really, their market share was 70, 80% of the audience in prime time. And when I left CBS, that was down under 50%. And so the 500 channel world emerged, yet sports still has predictable, so in a 500 channel world, how do you survive that cannibalization with all these competitors? Well, one way to do it is have a predictable rating, because there are sports fans, have their teams, have their passions, and that is something that is, that really is going to hold our industry in good stead going forward, I think.
So as you fast forward ahead in this whole area of broadcast, and then you formed the partnership with Comcast in the Bay Area to create your own regional network, how does that serve, in your mind, how does that model serve fans better and also help make you more competitive on the field?
Well, I think what you want to do is, one thing I learned, and for me it was radio, but I think now it's radio, television, it's your mobile device, it's your iPad, etc. You want to have baseball. The great thing about baseball is it can be your companion for 7 months, and really 12 months, but the games themselves 7 months. And as such, if you have the right presentation with the right piece of marketing around it, so that you don't have just the games, but you have all the shoulder programming, you can envelop a fan in ways that was never really possible before when we were growing up. So that Comcast Sportsnet, which has the 2 franchises, are the Giants and the Golden State Warriors, has a stickiness to it, so that we get fans really going to CSN, Comcast Sportsnet, for information, for daily updates. We have Brian Sabian, our general manager, is on every Tuesday from Willie Mays Plaza, and we have those kinds of things that it becomes sort of your good friend. And we have, the broadcasters. We make a lot of effort to make sure that we feel the broadcasters connect with the fans. So we have John Miller and Dave Fleming on radio, and Mike Krukow and Dwayne Kuiper on television. We feel that there's a connectivity to them that, there have been times if we have a down year, they may be more popular than any of the players. And that's something that, that you have the best friends. I grew up in listening to Russ Hodges and Lon Simmons, 2 Hall of Fame broadcasters. And I didn't know them, but I thought they were my friends.
Yeah. And the other thing that's unique about baseball as a property for a regional sports network is because of the 162-game schedule, you can underwrite the entire network on the backs of a baseball team, where you really can't do that with the other sports because of the limited time schedule.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing. From an overall financial standpoint, having equity in we own 1/3 of it, okay? So, and Comcast owns the other 2/3. Having equity in a regional sports network, I think if you're a franchise, is extremely important, because, let's face it, nobody really knows where the media world is going over the next, I would say, it used to be, people say a decade from now, what does it look like? I'd say, half a decade from now, 5 years from now, what does it really look like? Are people going over the top? Is the bundle going to break? Is it going to be more a la carte? And having the equity in this network and having your partner Comcast, I have great confidence that we'll be able to figure out and be there. We'll be capitalized in such a way and have the resources to be there to follow the consumer, however the consumer wants to consume, the fan wants to consume our games.
Yeah, it is amazing, though, Larry, to see the kind of cable deals and rights deals that we're starting to see, or not starting to see, continuing to see. And just when we think, when Artie Moreno did his deal a couple years ago, just when we think we see the high water mark, it gets topped again.
I think that's a function of what we were just talking about, which is there's desperation for content.
Yeah.
And that that if you really, the regional sports network or the sports fan, you've got to have the team, and you're willing to make a payment to keep these services in existence to the teams. Now, the reality, though, as we're finding in Los Angeles, is that there's a breaking point. That as you carry it out, and the distributor pays the team a big rights fee, and they tries to claw that back through the end consumer, ultimately in the cable bill, there's a breaking point. And I think we got to be very careful that we honor the consumer and what the consumer's ability to absorb is, because not every fan, if we have this bundle, not every fan is going to be watching sports, yet they're going to pay for it in their cable bill. So there's a very, and we try in San Francisco to do, working with Comcast to be mindful of that.
Yeah. You know, it wasn't long after you came to the Giants in the early 90s that the project of AT&T Park became a reality, and that was something that you took the lead on. And you know, one of the interesting things about this project was that it was essentially private financing. And in a world where all of the ballparks being built around the country had some component of public funding, some more than others, what was the thinking behind doing a privately financed ballpark? And
so the history, when we bought the team, this group came together. I was sort of the sweat equity guy 23 years ago, and we had this group of really strong business and civic leaders in Northern California, names that were really national and international names. I mean, going back in the early days when I look at the list of, you know, Bill Hewitt from Hewlett-Packard, and Arthur Rock, who was the seed venture capitalist for Apple and Intel, and some fantastic, you know, names and people. And they were in it to keep the Giants in San Francisco. And our history was we had lost 4 elections. The previous owner had lost 4 elections for public financing for a ballpark to replace Candlestick. So we were able to prevent the team from moving to Tampa. They had a deal to move to Tampa, but we were able to persuade the league to not allow that deal so our group could take over and try to get a ballpark built. But, you know, a lot of analytical people in our ownership group, Peter McGowan being the leader of the group, chairman and CEO of Safeway, does a lot of things by the numbers. We bought the team, and we had no idea what our business plan was going to be, because we just had to keep the team. We were on a timeline when the Giants were going to move at the end of '92 to Tampa, and there was a league meeting in November, and they had announced the sale in August, and we had to defeat that move prior to the November meeting, and we were able to get the vote, and so we had the team, and at that point, and I remember one of our investors say, we have good news and we have bad news. The good news is we just bought the team. The bad news is we just bought the team. What the heck do we do now? And the first thing we did, which is certainly would not be a surprise to you, and something that all of you would probably do as well, is we did some research. And we found a couple things. The first thing we found was when we asked, you know, what do you think of the Giants? This is 1993. What do you think of the Giants, and why do you go or why do you not go? And we found that the fans were basically numb. They were exhausted from this because they saw sports in their lives as something that was a playground. It was something they used as an escape, something that they loved getting away from the problems of life. But when the subject of the Giants came up, is, oh my goodness, they're screaming about a ballpark, Candlestick's not good enough, they're threatening to move. And it was sort of like the Giants were a subject for the business page or the front page as opposed to the sports page. So that was a turnoff, number one. And the other thing we found when we asked about the ballpark itself and replacing Candlestick, we found had very interesting results. We surveyed the city, the voters. These are the voters who had voted against public funding. We found 75% of the voters wanted the Giants in a new ballpark, thought it was appropriate for the Giants to leave Candlestick, and thought a downtown ballpark would be spectacular. 75%, 3 out of 4. Yet, by the same token, 75% said, we don't want to pay for it. You guys pay for it. This isn't the symphony or the opera or whatever. This isn't, you know, a city-owned or run institution. It's privately held. You guys pay for it. So it put us in the position, really, of if we wanted the survival of the team was really going to require a private solution, privately built solution. So this was coming in the mid-'90s. One of the things we did to answer the first issue, which was they were numb, was we stopped talking about a new ballpark, said we're going to we're going to go underground, we're going to research it, and work on a new ballpark. So for about 2.5 years, we did that, didn't talk about the problems of Candlestick, and we actually made Candlestick better and improved it, and spent a lot of time and money just doing that privately. So we put $15, $20 million into the ballpark, even though it was a municipal facility. And then on the other side, we came up with a plan to do a privately built ballpark. We didn't make a lot of friends in Major League Baseball at the time because other teams were looking for public solutions. And I remember Larry Lucchino, when he was running the Padres, asked me to come down to San Diego because when we announced we were doing it privately, then San Diego would say, well, why don't you do one privately? Minnesota said, well, you do the ballpark privately. And I went and I said, look, San Francisco's not San Diego, and we have a strong corporate base, and we have a good regional economy, and maybe potentially even stronger, more Fortune 100 companies in San Francisco than in San Diego or Minneapolis or wherever. And so even with baseball not loving it, we went forward because it was our only way to go forward and did the private ballpark, and took on debt. And we were at the time in 1999, the ballpark went into construction in 96 actually. We were the most debt-laden franchise in all of baseball.
Yeah, and now today you have a ballpark that's revered as really probably the premier, certainly one of the top 2 or 3 ballparks in the game, and that's got to give you a lot of pleasure to.
Oh, it's the fans vote, and one of the things that we did a study, another piece of research when we were converting from Candlestick to the new ballpark. And what we found, it was called Pac Bell Park at first, and then they were acquired by AT&T, so it's AT&T Park now. But one of the things we found was that with our normalized average of attendance in the last 10 years at Candlestick was 1.5 million. To make it, as I said earlier, to really make it, we needed to be at 3 million, and we've been at 3.3 really for 15 of the last 17 years, 3.2 to 3.3, or 13 of the last 15 years. But what we found was, where do you get that delta between the 1.5 that were coming to Candlestick and the 3.2, let's say, 3.2 million that you had to have in your ballpark every night to make the thing work? That additional doubling effect, 1.5 million, 1.7 million additional fans. Where do you get them? Well, those additional fans probably are not fans that are walking down the street memorizing batting averages and ERAs and can recite your opening day lineup or your lineup tomorrow night's game. Those are the more casual fans. The real hardcore fans, they're the ones that were in the 1.5 million group. So how do you get that delta? And so we have to create a ballpark, we believe, that honors baseball, but also creates a lot of options for fans, or other hooks for fans to get them in the park. And then once they're in, we think we can make them hardcore fans, get them up the ladder. So through the food and through the music and the entertainment and just the optionality of a ball game, going to a ball game being like a picnic in Golden Gate Park or up in the wine country, or a trip to a theme park, or just a night at the movies with your family, and create that. And so that was the goal, and we did a fair amount of research about that. One of the things that came up, and we created a department just around this, is customer service. Is that experience from the minute, literally from the minute they leave their house to when they get home, how was that experience? We can't control, we try to, we can't really control whether the team wins or loses. I mean, they lose 60 games, we have a good year. So that's not as controllable, but it sure is controllable whether the ballpark's clean, whether people are friendly, whether there's all sorts of fun activities for kids. And so that we honed in on, and we created a person who trained everybody that was customer facing, ahead of guest services at the vice president level, was one of the first things we did to change the organization, get ready for the new ballpark.
Yeah. Today in the world of sports, and certainly in baseball, dynamic ticket pricing is pretty commonplace. Many teams are involved in it. Of course, the secondary market is that's what's all about. But I don't think very many people realize that the Giants were the first team in Major League Baseball, I don't know about in professional sports, but in Major League Baseball, to even attempt dynamic ticket pricing. What sort of led you down that path to even try that?
Well, and dynamic ticket pricing, and even before that, when we were opening the ballpark, the secondary market of tickets. So everybody now, it's an accepted practice, right? You have secondary market, you sell seats 2-3 times. But when we were opening the ballpark, one of the big challenges was, how did we get the season ticket count up? And we had some really great, amazing people in our ticket department, in our IT area, that came up with technology, barcode technology on the tickets, and this is back in the late 90s. So now it sounds like old hat, but way before StubHub or any of the services that allowed season ticket holders. We created something called the Double Play Ticket Network that allowed season ticket holders to put their seats back up if they couldn't use their seats, back up on the marketplace. And this is, again, late 90s. And the question was asked by all of them. We had lots of internal debates. Is this a business or a service? And the answer that we concluded was, this is a service. That ultimately there may be some, maybe a revenue streams around it, and there have been, obviously, we all know that. But at the time, if we could start out with a season ticket count, we started out with 30,000, 29,400 season ticket holders buying all 81 games. And if through the ability for them to put their seats back up and know that they wouldn't have that dreaded four words in the ticket business, 5 words, are tickets in the drawer, right? So you're a season ticket holder, and I couldn't go last night, and I couldn't give them to my friends at work or my clients, so the tickets were left in the drawer. You can get them up. And so that was a concept that through the secondary market. So that was kind of the first thing in kind of our laboratory at the Giants on tickets. And then to your point about dynamic pricing, again, our folks just incredibly forward thinking. And look, we're sitting in Silicon Valley, so we need to figure out, and we have a lot of people coming to us with ideas and things. But the notion of dynamic pricing in a way that would take it beyond the variable pricing. So I think other teams were doing, our rivals, the Dodgers are in town, the tickets are a different price differently. But how do you, just on a demand yield algorithm, how do you really move prices on an hourly basis like the airlines might or the hotels, et cetera? And that was something that we worked with ultimately. We're the first client of QQ. And many of you probably are working with QQ. I'm not sure how many of you were in that side of the business, but they're actually, we had to go to Austin. We'd left Silicon Valley, and we connected with this firm that's based in Austin, the University of Texas PhDs, and created a relationship with them, and then that's now grown, and there are many companies doing that. So I'm just very proud of the innovative, and all of you have this in your teams, but back in those days, it wasn't as common.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the team and the success on the field. And you have the longest tenured GM in baseball. You have a baseball ops department, and many of your people in your baseball ops department have been around literally for decades. You've got one of the longest tenured managers, who's probably on his way to the Hall of Fame. Talk a little bit about continuity and the role that plays and how you view it.
Vince, I'm really proud, and we got asked a lot in the World Series or whatever. What's the Giants, sort of secret sauce or whatever? And I think if you look at the years we've won the championship and the years that we've played well but not won championships but had some success, I think that so much of it does relate to the fact that we have folks that are working very closely together and have been for a long time. Now, that's not going to go forever, right? And you're going to have the changes, and one person's continuity is another person's getting stale. The great thing about our group is that there's continuity, but there's a real open-mindedness to learning and to bringing in new concepts and bringing in analytics or whatever is state of the art. So in Brian Sabian, who is the longest tenured GM, as you mentioned, and his group, there's been very little turnover, and they're all really, some of them came with Brian from his Yankee days. Others have been added. There's a lot of young folks that have been here. Their entire careers have been with the Giants. And then Bruce Bochy, and it's interesting coming from the television business, where if somebody comes to, let's say, run a studio, run a network, they bring in their whole new group of people with them. It's kind of the domino effect when you make change often. Bruce Bochy came in as our manager in 2007, only our third field manager in 23 years of an ownership group, and we've had just 2 general managers in those 23 years, Bob Quinn and Brian Sabian. And Bruce comes in 2000, and he adds 1 coach. And he keeps Dave Righetti, who is the pitching coach, and he keeps Ron Wotus, who is the bench coach, and on and on. He brought in Tim Flannery from San Diego. And that was it, just 1 coach. And what that said was, look, I want to play into this Giants way that you have. And what's really important also, and many of the folks are in the room here who work with us, and I'm so proud of them, is that this is infused through the minor league system. And we've got folks that have been with us a long time in through the minor league system that that carry. That's not a surprise when you get to the major league level or AAA. How we do things, because it's done. And I think a lot of teams try to do that. We've been able to do it. I would also say at the general manager and manager level, Brian and Bruce, I think there's a unique relationship, and that in some ways might be the most important relationship in sports. I think on the team level is the GM and the manager or the head coach, if it's a football or basketball, have to be on the same page, and they have to be integrated. So our general manager, what's he responsible for? He's responsible for putting the team together, developing the roster. But you know what? Brian asks Bruce for his opinion on every trade, every free agent signing, every call-up, and he considers Bruce's opinion. Now, he may go the other way for whatever reasons, financial reasons, whatever, but and Bruce really appreciates that. On the other side, what's Bruce Bochy's job? He has to put out the lineup every day, and he has to make changes, the pitching changes, and manage the people that he has. But he will ask Brian Sabian, what do you think about this lineup? What do you think about Hunter Pence leading off? What do you think about this or that? And he'll listen to Brian, and sometimes he doesn't always go the way Brian suggests, but there's that respect and that back and forth, and that's, I think, it's continuity, but it's also having open debate and getting the value of Bruce Bochy's 35 years in the game when Brian's going to make a move, and Brian getting the value of the manager with the more wins than any other manager, active manager right now, Bruce Bochy, when Brian's going to make a move. So that's a big thing. It's hard to create, and I'm very proud of everybody, and then the people underneath them participate in big ways.
One of the things that I've observed about really some of the most successful organizations in Major League Baseball is having their former stars accessible and around and available to create that sense of purpose that is bigger than just what you're doing each day when you walk out on the field. I noticed that the Giants are very big on having the Willies around and having other of your former players. How do you view that whole part of the equation?
Well, the one thing about baseball, again, that I think separates us in a very positive way is we're so generational. And you go to games with your father and your grandfather and grandmother and aunt, and it's a beautiful sport that way. And our memories, because the games are during the summer when we're off of work or we're out of school, and you just create these memories. And for those memories to be passed down because I go to a game and there's Willie Mays, or there's, in whatever era, Matt Williams or Will Clark or J.T. Snow, whoever is back working for the team, it allows for that sort of handoff to generations. And so, we think about, I would love for, say, Buster Posey or Matt Cain or Tim Lincecum one day, 25 years from now, the kids that grew up watching them win World Series, to have them then have their children come to the games, bring their children to the games and say, you know what, 2014, that was unbelievable what those guys did, or 2012 or whatever. And Tim Lincecum, I saw his first game, and I saw him when his hair was long. I mean, so it's it's those things, and I think that's, the other sports have it to some extent, but I think we have it. We have sort of the raw materials to create that stickiness, if you will, that is that's really quite something.
Yeah. So Larry, talk a little bit about how your organization views analytics, and analytics as it pertains to what goes on the field. That's really a lot of what this conference is about. Yeah. So talk a little bit about the Giants' view.
So I think we're a model, we've said this before, we're a model that's, if there's a continuum of teams that are doing it to the nth degree and the teams that aren't doing as much, I'd say we're a hybrid, but we've been sort of at it for a long time, sometimes quietly. Mm-hmm. Brian Sabian, I was talking to Brian yesterday, he reminded me when he came in 1993, we had some IT guys and they were burping out some statistical things that were, and there was a much smaller group, but he was on it then. Again, didn't talk about it all that much. And I have to say that we have people like Brian whose background is scouting, okay, but very much open-minded to integrating analytics. And when presented to guys in uniform, the manager and the coaches, they're not making paper airplanes out of the information and tossing it. They're thinking about it, they're looking at it. And so we put people there, we have a balance, or we have a group in both in baseball ops and in IT. That Bill Schlau is here, who's head of Giants IT department, and Bobby Evans, who runs a lot of our baseball department, and Yoshai Goldfarb. And so we have a couple of different groups that are hard at it. And so we do it. We want to make sure that there's that the scouts understand that their information is valued. We want to make sure that the players understand that no matter what the analytics are, they've got to go do it on the field. They're not robots. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's a very good blend, and I think it's stood us in good stead. And we actively look at developing proprietary information as much as possible. We actively look at partnering with companies in Silicon Valley and elsewhere to develop that proprietary information. And we probably don't talk about it all that much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, I believe one of the things I read was a quote from Brian Sabian that said, we don't talk a lot about what we do. And one of the reasons, and I thought this was a fascinating leadership principle that makes a lot of sense to me, is we want to empower our players. We don't want our players to think if the game is on the line and it doesn't happen, that it's maybe some genius upstairs didn't push the right buttons, that it really is all about us. And that's certainly an attitude that you can look in the dugout and just see through the cameras that your team clearly embodies.
Right.
That it's all about making it happen.
Think of how disempowering it would be if in any of our jobs somebody said, you're kind of on a trend line to perform like this, and this is how we see you. Then, I don't know, in some ways that could become self-fulfilling, right? So it's just, that's kind of what their expectation is, and I can prove them wrong, and so I think that we're using analytics a lot to make the decisions to who to put on the team and how a lineup should look and how to, and scouting decisions and drafting decisions and all that. But I think that when you have the human interaction with them, I mean, when I'm talking, I often sit at games with players we've just signed and drafted and signed, and they're now Giants for the first time. I'll sit at the games, and after that process is complete, I don't talk about their analytics. I don't talk about, wow, you really profile well. I talk about, their character and all that, because the human element is important. But we make a lot of effort, because we know you can create ranges of certainty through analytics that weren't available years ago, and we want to do that. Yeah. But we want the human element. We want the human element to flourish as much as possible in the players. I mean, that's there were games last year in the playoffs that we won, I think, just by a lot of players doing things that were sort of highly unusual, yet sort of consistent with the analytics. So.
Yeah. I have one final question, because we're really nearing the end of our time. You're the chairman of the Strategic Planning Committee for Major League Baseball. One of the issues that Commissioner Manfred has talked about is the need to engage young people in the game. You're based in Silicon Valley and have been deeply involved in technology. What role does technology play? Where is BAM headed? I mean, this is probably a whole 45-minute discussion in and of itself, but just give us a top line on what you see Major League Baseball doing on the horizon to continue to attract young fans.
Well, I think for starters, Vince, you have to see that, again, a real strength of baseball. We can talk about baseball being, quote, slower or whatever, and there's ways to address that, but a real strength of baseball is, in many ways, it's a game made for the internet. It's a game made for the digital world, right? Because of the number of games, the fact I'm talking about from a fan perspective, the fact it's statistically rich, the fact that it has a tremendous tradition, and the traditions are honored, and records are honored, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that we've got to figure out a way that we just continue to stay one step ahead of where everybody's going. And if kids are going to Snapchat, then we have to figure out ways to create platforms on Snapchat or wherever that goes. Now, BAM, and you all, I'm sure, have worked with BAM to some extent, or at least are aware of what they're doing. They're doing a pretty good job of looking at new frontiers. So one of the things BAM is doing, and this is a great learning for us, is they have a third-party services business called BAM Tech, we just call it BAM Tech for short, where they're actually creating technology for non-baseball enterprises like HBO and World Wrestling and the PGA Tour. And that's important because we're seeing how the rest of the world is consuming media. I think that what's incredibly important for us right now, and I have teenage children, is to see how they're consuming the game and be right there with them as they consume it with our platforms. And I say this often. Giants ballpark is 6 blocks from the headquarters of Twitter. Okay, and we have to understand that if somebody's at Twitter working, one of the employees at Twitter, let's say, they are not working 9 to 5. That's the first thing to understand. And they're not, if they're a Giants fan, they're not leaving their office whenever they leave their office. And let's say we have a night game up the street, a home game. They're not really probably going home and plugging in to the bundle. They're consuming it differently. And we've got to be there with the offerings that allow them to consume it. And it's a branding thing, it's an availability thing. Ultimately, it's kind of goes back to secondary market. Ultimately, we'll be able to monetize it. I'm less worried about the monetization. I'm more concerned about being right there for it. And let's face it, we've done some fantastic things with the MLB app, MLB at Bat. Apple says it's the second most popular bat in their whole, second most popular app in their whole system. At Bat is. So we're doing some really good things, but it takes a lot of innovating and a lot of work and a lot of growth, and we've got to push, and we have to realize that increasingly Major League Baseball is a technology company, has to be to continue to be compelling and relevant.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thank you so much for your time this
morning.
Thank
you for all you do.
We have a short break, and then we'll come back for a one-on-one with Tony La Russa.